The Wind in the Willows, Chapter 6, The Further Adventures of Toad. The next morning, Toad was up early with bright sunlight streaming in on him. Sitting up, he rubbed his eyes and wondered for a moment where he was. Then he remembered. He was free. Free! He was warm from end to end as he thought of the jolly world outside, waiting eagerly for him to make his triumphal entrance, anxious to help him and to keep him company, as it always had been in days of old before misfortune fell upon him. He shook himself, combed the dry leaves out of his hair with his fingers, and marched forth into the comfortable morning sun. Toad had the world all to himself that early summer morning. He was looking, however, for something that could tell him clearly which way he ought to go. With police scouring the country for him, every minute was of importance. Presently, round a bend in the canal came plodding a solitary horse. From ropes attached to its collar stretched a long line, and then, with a swirl of water, a barge it was drawing slid up, its sole occupant a big, stout woman, one brawny arm laid on the tiller. "Nice morning, ma'am," she remarked to Toad. "I dare say it is, ma'am," responded Toad, "to them that's not in sore trouble like what I am. My married daughter sends off for me to come to her at once, so off I comes, fearing the worst, and I've left my business to look after itself. I'm in the washing and laundering line, and now I've lost all my money, and lost my way, and as for what might be happening to my married daughter, I don't like to think." "Where might your married daughter be living, ma'am?" asked the barge woman. "She lives close to a fine house called Toad Hall," replied Toad. "Perhaps you have heard of it." "Toad Hall? Why, I'm going that way myself," replied the barge woman. "I'll give you a lift." Toad stepped lightly on board and sat down with great satisfaction. "Toad's luck again," thought he. "So you're in the washing business, ma'am?" said the barge woman politely. "Are you very fond of washing?" "I love it," said the Toad. "I simply dote on it, never so happy as when I've got both arms in the wash tub." "What a bit of luck meeting you," said the barge woman thoughtfully. "Why, what do you mean?" asked the Toad nervously. "Well," said the woman, "my husband's such a fellow for shirking his work and leaving the barge to me. How am I to get on with my washing? There's a heap of things of mine in the cabin. If you'll take one or two and put them through the wash tub, it'll be a pleasure for you, as you rightly say, and a real help for me." "Here, let me help you steer," said the Toad, now thoroughly frightened. "I might spoil your things, or not do them as you like." "Let you steer?" said the woman, laughing. "It takes practice to steer properly. Besides, it's dull work, and I want you to be happy. No, you do the washing you're so fond of." Toad resigned himself to his fate. "I suppose any fool can wash," he thought. He selected a few garments and set to it. A long half-hour passed, and every minute saw Toad getting crosser and crosser. His back ached, and he noticed with dismay that his paws were getting all crinkly. He muttered words that should never pass the lips of a washerwoman or Toad, and lost the soap for the 50th time. A burst of laughter made him look round. The barge woman was laughing till the tears ran down her cheeks. "I thought you must be humbug all along," she said. "Pretty washerwoman you are. Never washed so much as a dishcloth in all your life, I'll say." Toad's temper fairly boiled over. "You common, low, fat barge woman!" he shouted. "Washerwoman indeed! I would have you know that I am a very well-known, respected, distinguished Mr. Toad." The woman peered under his bonnet. "Why, so you are," she cried. "A nasty, crawly Toad in my nice clean barge. Now that's a thing I will not have." One big mottled arm shot out and caught Toad by a foreleg, while the other gripped him by a hind leg. Then the world turned upside down and Toad found himself flying through the air. He reached the water with a loud splash, rose to the surface spluttering, and saw the barge woman laughing, and he vowed, as he coughed and choked, to get even with her. He struck out for the shore and started to run after the barge. Running swiftly on, he overtook the horse, unfastened the tow rope, jumped lightly on the horse's back, and urged it to a gallop. Looking back, he saw that the barge had run aground, and the bargewoman was shouting, "Stop! Stop!" "Oh, I've heard that song before," said Toad, laughing, as he spurred the horse on. He had travelled some miles when he found he was on a wide common. Near to him was a gypsy caravan, and beside it a man who was sitting on a bucket turned upside down, staring out at the wide world. Nearby, over a fire, hung an iron pot, and out of that pot came forth rich and varied smells. Toad now knew that he had not really been hungry before. This was the real thing at last, and no mistake. He looked the gypsy over, and the gypsy looked at him. Presently the gypsy remarked, "Want to sell me that there horse of yours?" Toad was completely taken aback. It had not occurred to him to turn the horse into cash, but he badly wanted money and a solid breakfast. "What?" he said. "Me sell this beautiful young horse of mine? Oh, no, it's out of the question. This horse is a cut above you altogether. No, not to be thought of for a moment. All the same, how much might you be disposed to offer me for this beautiful, shiny young horse of mine?" The gypsy looked the horse over. "Shilling a leg?" he said briefly. "A shilling a leg?" cried Toad. "Oh, no, I could not think of accepting 4 shillings for this beautiful young horse." "Well," said the gypsy, "I'll make it 5 shillings, and that's my last word." Toad pondered. At last he said, "Look here, you hand me over 6 shillings and 6pence, and as much breakfast as I can possibly eat out of that iron pot of yours, and in return I will make over to you my spirited young horse with the beautiful harness thrown in." The gypsy grumbled frightfully, but he counted out 6 shillings and 6pence. Then he tilted the pot, and a glorious stream of hot stew gurgled onto a plate. Toad stuffed and stuffed and stuffed. He thought that he had never eaten so good a breakfast in all his life. When Toad had taken as much stew as he could possibly hold, he set forth again in the best possible spirits. As he tramped along, he thought of his adventures, and his pride began to swell within him. "Ho, ho," he said to himself, "what a clever Toad I am! There is surely no animal equal to me for cleverness in the whole wide world." He got so puffed up with conceit that he made up a song as he walked in praise of himself, and sang it at the top of his voice. "The world has held great heroes, as history books have showed, but never a name to go to fame compared with that of Toad. The Queen and her ladies in waiting sat at the window and sewed. She cried, 'Look, who is that handsome man?' They answered, 'Mr. Toad.'" But his pride was shortly to have a severe fall. After some miles he reached the high road, and, as he glanced along its white length, he saw approaching him a speck that turned into a dot, and then into a blob, and then into something very familiar. A double note of warning, only too well known, fell on his delighted ears. "This is something like it," said the excited Toad. "I will hail my brothers at the wheel, and they will give me a lift. With luck, it may even end in my driving up to Toad Hall in a motor car. That will be one in the eye for Badger." He stepped out confidently into the road to hail the motor car when suddenly he became very pale, his knees shook, and he collapsed. The approaching car was the very one he had stolen that fateful day when all his troubles began. He sank down in a shabby, miserable heap in the road, murmuring, "It's all over now. Prison again. Oh, hapless Toad!" The terrible motor car drew slowly nearer till at last he heard it stop just short of him. Two gentlemen got out, and one of them said, "Oh dear, here is a poor washerwoman who has fainted in the road. Let us take her to the village, where doubtless she has friends." They tenderly lifted Toad into the car and proceeded on their way. When Toad heard them talk in so kind a manner, he knew that he was not recognised, and his courage began to revive. "Look," said one of the gentlemen, "the fresh air is doing her good. How do you feel now, ma'am?" "A good deal better, thank you, sir," said the Toad in a feeble voice. "I was only thinking if I might sit on the front seat, where I could get the fresh air full on my face, I should soon be all right again." "What a sensible woman," said the gentleman. "Of course you shall." Toad was almost himself again by now. He looked about him, and the old cravings rose up and took possession of him entirely. He turned to the driver at his side. "Please, sir," he said, "would you let me try and drive for a little? It looks so easy, and I should like to be able to tell my friends I had once driven a motor car." The driver laughed, and the gentleman said, "Bravo, ma'am, I like your spirit. Let her have a try." Toad eagerly took the wheel, listened with affected humility to the instructions given to him, and set the car in motion. The gentlemen clapped their hands, saying, "Fancy a washerwoman driving as well as that, the first time!" Toad went a little faster, then faster still, and faster. He heard the gentleman call out, "Be careful, washerwoman!" And this annoyed him, and he began to lose his head. "Washerwoman indeed!" he shouted recklessly. "I am the Toad, the motor car snatcher, the prison breaker, the Toad who always escapes." With a cry of horror, they rose and flung themselves on him. "Seize him!" they cried. "Bind him! Chain him!" Alas, they should have thought to stop the motor car first. With a half turn of the wheel, Toad sent the car crashing through a low hedge and into the thick mud of a horse pond. Toad landed with a thump, picked himself up and set off, running till he was breathless and had to settle down to a walk. When he had recovered himself somewhat, he began to giggle. "Ho-ho!" he cried. "Toad again! Toad, as usual, comes out on top. Clever Toad! Oh, how clever I am! How clever—" A noise behind him made him turn his head and look. Oh, misery! Oh, despair! About 2 fields off, a chauffeur and 2 policemen were running towards him as hard as they could go. Poor Toad pelted away again. He ran desperately, but they still gained steadily. He struggled on blindly and wildly when suddenly the earth fouled under his feet and splash! He found himself head over heels in deep, rapid water. In his panic, he had run straight into the river. He tried to grasp the reeds that grew along the water's edge, but the stream was so strong that it tore them out of his hands. Presently he saw that he was approaching a big dark hole in the bank just above his head, and as the stream bore past him, he caught hold of the edge and held on. As he sighed and stared before him into the hole, something twinkled in its depths. A familiar face. It was the water rat.